Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending our event today featuring our curators, Mimi Zeiger and Iker Gill, in conversation with Jeremiah Chiu of Some All None, our graphic designer who's been creating the identity and wayfinding system for the 2020-21 cycle of Exhibit Columbus. My name is Anne Surak, and I'm the director of Exhibit Columbus. As a friendly reminder to our audience before we begin, this event is being recorded, and please keep your audio muted. If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the chat function and stay tuned at the end of the session when we'll make time for questions and answers. For those of you joining us for the first time or those new to our work, Exhibit Columbus is a program of the Landmark Columbus Foundation, whose mission is to care for, celebrate, and advance the cultural heritage of Columbus, Indiana. On behalf of the organization and its board of directors, I am so glad to welcome you to our event today. We would much rather be welcoming you to our city in person and hope that you can join us in Columbus for the opening of the exhibition on August 21st. Exhibit Columbus creates a 2-year cycle of programming that activates the design legacy of Columbus through symposia, design presentations, and a free public exhibition. The 2020-21 cycle of Exhibit Columbus is exploring the theme New Middles with curators Mimi Zeiger and Iker Gill. In March, we unveiled the design concepts for the 2021 exhibition by our 5 J. Irwin and Xenia S. Miller Prize recipients, the 7 University Design Research Fellows, and our high school design team. Please visit our website, exhibitcolumbus.org, to catch up on all the content we've been creating around New Middles, including our most recent conversation with our photography fellows, Virginia Hanusik and David Shalil. We also invite you to join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram using hashtags New Middles and Exhibit Columbus. Follow us at Exhibit Columbus. There are many who support our work and have done so for a long time. As always, thank you to our Design Legacy supporters and all those that help make Exhibit Columbus a reality. The Design Legacy supporters are key individuals, corporations, and foundations that have supported our work from the beginning and really believe passionately in the mission of our organization. We always thank you for your vision and unparalleled support. Now I would like to welcome our Exhibit Columbus co-curators Iker Gill and Mimi Zeiger to join me. Mimi will be framing the discussion for our event today and introducing Jeremiah. Iker is the director of Mass Studio, a collaborative architecture and design firm. He's also the founder and editor-in-chief of design journal Mass Context, as well as the executive director of the SOM Foundation. Iker was the associate curator of the US Pavilion at the 16th Venice Architecture Biennale. Welcome, Iker. Mimi is a Los Angeles-based critic, editor, and curator. She was the co-curator of the US Pavilion for the 2018 Venice Architecture Biennale, and her writing has been widely published. Mimi teaches at the Southern California Institute of Architecture and in the Media Design Practices MFA program at the Art Center College of Design. Welcome, Mimi.
Thank you, Anne. Hi, Iker. Great to see everyone here today. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. After the last symposium last fall and the design presentations earlier this year, Iker and I are very excited to continue to share more aspects of New Middles with the design, with the Columbus community and the design community and everyone joining us via Zoom. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the long history of a city named for Christopher Columbus in a state named for Indians. The land where Columbus, Indiana is located was ceded to the United States in 1818 through the Treaty of St. Mary's, yet this place has been a site of human activity for more than 12,000 years through the rich and vibrant cultures of the Adena, Hopewell, Cahokia, Shawnee, Miami, Kickapoo, and Delaware nations. We recognize that the languages and cultures and traditions of these nations continue to this day, and although we're gathering virtually, we remain entwined by land, water, and soil. So let me just share my screen. So before I introduce Jeremiah, our incredible graphic designer for this cycle of Exhibit Columbus, I wanted to take a few minutes to share a bit more on New Middles and to frame the theme that Jeremiah has so beautifully interpreted into a visual language for the exhibition. So I want to start here with this quote from J. Irwin Miller. Design is at its best is an exercise in honesty and imagination, not in prettiness, so that it's in an age when product claims seem not believable, when leaders seem not credible, when in every statement we must seek meanings within meanings, the visual presence of honest, sensitive, imaginative design in things great and small reminds us of the capacity for truthfulness and creativity with which each of us is endowed at birth, and which over the years in each of us becomes steadily more tarnished. This quote resonates with me. Iker and I and the whole Exhibit Columbus team have been thinking about the theme New Middles for over a year. It has been a year devastated by pandemic losses and one marked by uprising and protest as we recognize systemic racism and the need for societal change. This 2020-21 cycle is a chance for Columbus to think about its future through design. Design illuminates meaning, as Miller's remarks suggest, and that's through creativity and imagination. And we need those right now. Design is a tool that makes things and systems and ideas visible, things that can't be seen. Our participants have embraced that brief and have taken our ideas farther and in directions greater than we could have imagined. With New Middles, we hope to make visible interconnections between cities and communities, between people and the watersheds we live in, and between our past and our future. New Middles explores the future of the center of the United States and the regions connected by the Mississippi watershed. This is an area we see here, interconnected beyond political borders. Early in our research, Iker and I came across this quote from landscape architect James Corner. In The Agency of Mapping, he writes, "Milieu is a French term that means surroundings, medium, and middle. Milieu has neither a beginning nor end, but is surrounded by other middles in a field of connections, relationships, extensions, and potentials." For us, it speaks to the way that the middle is connected to other middles, just like the way the tributaries of the Mississippi are connected to the Great River, and how we're actually all connected to each other. This is a Harold Fisk's map, a meander map of the Mississippi from the 1940s. And it just shows how middle cities are connected by the Mississippi watershed from north to south, from the Canadian border to the Gulf, and from east to west, from Appalachia to the plains. And within this region, there are many centers. These centers hold many timelines and pass towards possible futures. We like this definition of the middle because it connects Columbus to a network of towns and cities that share similar concerns about the future, be them social, economic, or ecological. When we look at this region, here using high-tech LiDAR imaging, a little different than Fisk's map, but still the same region, we see the beauty and complexity of the watershed. Political theorist Paulina Hoja Espejo, in her recent book on borders, writes, "The watershed model presents borders not as the exclusionary limits of communities, but as these interconnected edges of complex wholes. Edges where institutions and people, animals, plants, and objects create unique combinations." As curators, we're interested in seeking out these unique combinations and in recentering Columbus within the long timeline of the Middle City, stretching backwards to include indigenous settlements that predate Columbus's namesake arrival in North America, and also pushing forward. In this bicentennial year for the city, what might the next 200 years bring, and how the twists and turns of this region's history will impact the future? And so we're looking at the Middle City from Main Street, and here we have Columbus's Washington Street, to Megalopolis, to the bright lights of Indianapolis, Chicago, and even just beyond the horizon, Toronto. This idea of the middle city goes beyond geography. It can be Midwest, mid-sized, or middle American. And also, as our current moment makes quite clear, middle is not average, it's not neutral. Middle is really its own condition, especially in relationship to changing demographics or technology, mobility, climate change, health crises, and the ways that cities are trying to address past and present injustices. We're also interested in how Columbus is home to so many 20th century urban archetypes, whether that's the main street, the bank, the post office, the park, library, school, or even the church. These are all shared common blocks of what make up a city. They're religious and secular, civic and private. And Columbus has some of the best design examples in the Western modern tradition. But how might these spaces evolve to meet 21st century demands? This is a difficult question to answer, but we like to think that the works that will be on view in August will point a way forward and position Columbus as a model for the future of all middle cities. And so now I just want to make a quick pivot, and I want to show you a few of the images that Iker and I gave to Jeremiah to help him develop a visual language for new middles. We began by looking at the work of the British experimental architects Archigram, specifically their Instant City, which is a moving festival that pops up and invigorates daily life. And we saw that this Instant City was an analog to exhibit Columbus itself, the way that our installations will come and animate the city for a period of time. This idea of the Instant City and the architecture of the Instant City led us to think about the idea of the big tent, as in a circus tent, and how many ideas and many approaches to design could fit under one roof. And of course, we were also looking at the textures and patterns of the Mississippi watershed in the Midwest. This, again, is the Fisk map, and then these agricultural irrigation circles that dot the Midwest as you fly over them. And lastly, we looked at the work of Alexander Gerard, whose mid-century designs are so integral to Columbus, and whose playful forms and textures began to echo with our influences in exciting ways. And I think Jeremiah will speak more to this. So now I want to let Jeremiah take us through his practice and the graphic identity he's created for New Middles. But let me first introduce him. So Jeremiah Chiu is a Los Angeles-based graphic designer. He's also an artist, musician, and educator. From 2008 to 2016, he served as co-founder and principal of Plural, an award-winning and internationally recognized design studio. In addition to Plural, he's worked with Projects and Infoco, where Iker and I collaborated with him on the graphic identity for the US Pavilion for the 2018 Venice Architecture Biennial. Jeremiah is a resident DJ at Dublab and Lumpen Radio, and he has exhibited and performed at the Getty Center, at LACMA, the Cincinnati Contemporary Arts Center, and the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, amongst others. The list goes on. His practice, some all none, is at the intersection of art, music, technology, and publishing, and the studio is focused on activating graphic design beyond a traditional commercial practice, as you'll see, working equally to reimagine its role in a capital society and to implement it as a tool for community organization, social activation, and experimental expression. So I'm going to stop sharing and welcome Jeremiah.
Thanks so much for having me. I will share screen and take you through a presentation. Thanks so much for the introduction, for having me here today. It's been pleasure working with everyone so far, and I look forward to being face-to-face in person in the coming months. So sharing a presentation, I want to make sure everyone can see the screen. Hold on one moment, let me move this controller out of the way. And actually, let me just make sure that the sound is coming through. Okay. So I've been giving this presentation a little bit in different forms over the past year. It's evolved and continues to evolve. And I really wanted to position this in a different way so that the presentation gives you some insight into my practice, but also really allows you to see the way in which I'm thinking through, working through the projects that I do, as maybe mentioned, in music, in art, in design, in education, etc. So this is where it's at. We'll also give you an overview of many projects and then go a little bit into the work that I've been doing with new middles. The kind of society that I want to participate in. My name is Jeremiah Chiu, and I live in Los Angeles. I grew up in Chicago. I am a hybrid. Graphic designer, artist, musician, educator, and community organizer. This hybrid practice connects my interests. Like a family tree, connects relatives. Like a fingerprint, traces a path. And like a path, I'd rather not know where I'll end than explore all the places I might head. A teacher once told me, to be a good designer is to be a good generalist. I agree, the future is hybrid. Society used to say, jack of all trades, master of none. But society, as we now see it, needs less masters and instead needs to be jacked. So I embrace my own experimental path. One that embarks boldly into the unknown and cares less where I'm headed than making sure that the way that I head represents the kind of society that I want to participate in. Intention. In 2008, I co-founded a studio called Plural. We took it very seriously. Our intention was to extend the work that a traditional studio might offer by operating at a 50-50 proportion of client work to personal work. Change. Each year, a word presents itself as my guide. This year's word is voice. I think of it as a beacon, a path towards the unknown. I fully embrace it as a self-imposed rule, but ultimately understand it as a way to trust myself. In 2014, I moved to Los Angeles to refocus my practice and embrace new experiences. I learned that as a business grows, its priorities shift. At the same time, my desire to develop a practice that truly brought together all of my practices was necessary for me to grow. In following this path, I was open to where it might lead. I joined projects as they transitioned to the West Coast and shifted their studio to what is now Infoco. It was a way for me to experience another practice while developing my own, balancing learning with experimenting. It allowed me time to reconsider what it meant to establish a new practice, one that is unique to me and that asks what design can be. What if the goal of business was to plateau and sustain, rather than to expand infinitely? What might happen if we approach design as an act of removing versus adding? If we think about making as sustaining, so that every decision is logical, ethical, and necessary. My practice now is called Some All None. It oscillates in and out, inhaling, exhaling, expanding, contracting. In between graphic design, art, music, education, and community. There's no single roadmap towards this hybrid practice, as there's no single roadmap towards a hybrid future. Invention. With Smartphone Symphony, I created a chance music performance, placing the audience in the role of performer. 12 audio-visual loops overlap in any way. Exploring language, typography, and performance, word sound stanza is a MIDI typeface. It translates the English language into musical notation to be read by synthesizers. Similarly, a piano cannot play a sine wave was a graphic score commissioned by the Getty and part of their Pianographs exhibition. practice. The connections between these different disciplines are approached more as an overlap than a translation. Defining the parameters by asking what and why. What happens if something as simple as a label is designed to stack into a connecting image, creating an exquisite corpse? Can we create a new experience of something like a can by turning the label into a graphic score for you to play? This logo for SAIC, the School of the Art Institute in Chicago's 150th anniversary, a singular mark could not accurately represent 150 years of art making and art history. Instead, a framework following the function of a synthesizer provided infinite variation within a single structure. Through research and experimentation, design may act as a mode of removal versus addition, of discovering and uncovering, of synthesizing. Focus. While my practice continues to open, the intention still remains to maintain a 50-50 proportion of client work to personal work. The approach in client work, however, is now laser focused. Design options no longer drive the basis of a client project. Instead, projects are research-based. And a singular concept answers a specific question. A question that we collectively explore. Community. Last March, we found ourselves in quarantine. In response, I collaborated with 4 artists to stage a socially distanced concert. Musicians performed in a van in a parking lot, while the audience tuned in via FM radio. You are listening to
99.1 FM, KZUT, Los Angeles, California.
That's right, Dublab. Here we are, all together, maintaining our social distance. This is an experiment. We really don't have sort of an answer or an understanding of how it's going to resolve right now, so I think all we can do is just really work together and communicate with each other and try to do things like this that can bring community together in a safe way, but also know that so much is unknown right now and also just changing every day. Real life is happening right now, outside, everywhere, via this microphone, via us figuring out how to do this broadcast for the first time in a van, in a parking lot, in a city, on the earth. Last April, the world further shut down. Artists were out of work with no plan in sight. I set up a Twitch channel to be broadcast simultaneously on 105.5 FM in Chicago. And I created a guide for artists. It hosted over 100 artists that month and generated much needed financial and community support. Learning and broadcasting allowed me to explore narrative in a new way. The work continues to expand as monthly 2-hour episodes on DubLab. Future. Last June, protests erupted against racism, injustice, and systemic inequality. I grieved, I felt, I listened, and I wrote. I still grieve, I still feel, and I'm still listening. I wrote a framework for making from a prospective ally for this smudge. It's a process to hold myself and my practice accountable, providing a framework for making as the process of grieving. From April through August, I joined a group of artists as the weekly Wednesday editor for the Quarantine Times. The project commissioned over 400 artists through Public Media Institute in Chicago, as well as through additional grant funding. From October through January, all of the contributions were then compiled into a book documenting all of the artists' response. Last July, I held a virtual 4-week graphic design summer course at Otis College of Art and Design. The experimental course resulted in this publication, which is actually released today. The month-long course was proposed to the students as a 4-part experimental and collaborative workshop. It positioned graphic design and art making as an evolving practice, one that reestablishes the hierarchical balance between teacher and student, and incorporates philosophical inquiry, ethical, political, and representational questioning as integral to the practice of a contemporary practitioner. Instead of determining what's right or wrong, we may alternatively discover what is possible. Present. In developing the graphic identity system for new middles, a distinct visual approach was informed by the thematic. The system evolved from a series of visual explorations attempting to define newness and middles in graphic form. This visual poem served as a visual vocabulary or toolkit from which the identity system was then formed. And it built upon the work by Rick Valcenti and his team at Thirst who created the previous iteration of the symposium and exhibition. As well as the foundational research referencing Paul Rand, Gerard, the design artifacts of the Cummins Corporation. As well as Columbus's architectural landmarks. And additional touch points from the curators and the Exhibit Columbus team. The primary typography spelling out new middles is the custom alphabet derived from the counterform or the middle shape of the geometric word mark Columbus, as you see here on the screen. This base form, the circle or half circle, becomes the primary building block or module for all of the graphics. The fall 2020 symposium graphic treatment started from a bird's eye view, soaring above the horizon. The shapes formed a complex arrangement of circles, half circles, and intersecting lines. For the 2021 designer presentations, the graphic treatment zoomed in to a cellular level, revealing singular bold marks formed from the same circular motif. As the marks pivot towards the 2021 exhibition, it is revealed that they are not marks, but instead masks. They're open shapes that abstract a form behind. The overlapping masks oscillate in infinite formations, creating endless new middles. Everything for me is a practice in design, as much as it is a practice in art, music, community building, and activism. There's no single guideline or example, no right or wrong way. There's just a desire to represent the kind of society that I want to participate in. Thanks so much. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Jeremiah, for that beautiful presentation. And we're really just so grateful that we're able to go on this journey with you and to be able to explore your practice and then also be part of it more than once now. So that's really fantastic. I want to invite also Iker to join us in conversation and also to ask our audience to add questions to the chat. And we will sort of drop them into the conversation as they come up. But since I have both Jeremiah and Iker here, and I'm playing moderator a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about design in the Midwest. So Iker, you're from Spain, but you live in Chicago, and Jeremiah, as you told us, grew up in Chicago and now are based in Los Angeles. So both of you are both inside and outside what we're calling the middle. And I want to just ask a little bit about how does this perspective make its way into your work, whether that's design work or curatorial work?
I let the guest of honor.
Is that right, Iker? Oh man, I mean, I think that that's a great question. It's something that I think is I have an evolving response to as time goes on. I think that my moving out of Chicago allowed me to start to learn what my Chicagoisms were or are, right? And it's interesting to that's always the conversation, right? As soon as you move to a place or meet someone and they either are or aren't from the same place or don't have a familiarity or do, it really changes the way that you approach things. I think that what I hear most often out here in LA when I meet people is that, you must have a Midwestern work ethic. This idea of the middle class work ethic, or like that ability to want to get one's hands dirty in making things and doing things, I think is something that I really continue to resonate with, and that I love as a trait. I don't know if it's purely from a Midwestern ethos, but maybe Iker sees that. I don't know if that happened in Spain.
There is. I mean, I grew up in Spain, but I also I grew up in Bilbao, like a industrial city at that point, and then I moved to Barcelona and lived there for 9 years. So already that contrast in terms of its history, everything that has happened, it was already pretty interesting. So now I've lived 16 years in Chicago. So to me, there is something always very interesting about the idea of going to another place, but live enough time that you understand the culture, you understand the legacies, you understand the trajectories of things, but also being an outsider, you're able to connect some of those experiences with other places. So in a way, you get a certain knowledge about your local place or the place where you live by looking at something on the outside. And to me, I've learned almost a lot about Bilbao, having lived in Barcelona, having lived in Chicago, and the same way, just by living now in Chicago, by having had the experience of maybe a manufacturing town like Bilbao, it just helps me to make certain connections. And I think I've used that quite a lot in terms of curatorial approach, or the way of bringing people together, where I know that there is some common themes, even if physically they seem very seem apart. The context, the ideas, the ambitions, what people are looking after. I think there is some relationship there that it's always great.
I mean, I think this is a good segue. You almost set me up, Iker, to sort of ask about Columbus, right? And I think for the three of us, we've been invited into this place, and I just am curious about, how do you approach a place like Columbus? How are you sort of taking on this legacy of modernism and sort of integrating it into the work that you're doing right now? If either of you guys can answer.
Sure, I can jump in. Just, I think that this process, this wasn't the first time that we had worked together, so you were a little bit familiar, and I think that you could probably trace the similarities between the approach from project to project, in the sense that, for me, there's always, you always have to approach anything with a certain level of respect, right, for a place and a space and what's existing and established. And so my intention is never to come into a place and say, I have this grand idea that I want to just place on top of something, but instead to do the opposite, to say what already exists there, and what potential and possibility does this have. And so I think in any project that I'm working on, and it's also the way that I teach students to work through things, is I always start with a definition, the very baseline definition, because it allows me to begin with a starting point that forces me to release any assumptions that I may have. And as we know, language is so powerful, it's so flexible, it's so beautiful, that it can conjure all of these infinite approaches and directions that one may take into a project, that if I was to just sit down after reading a brief and say like, I have an idea, and only go in that direction, it may miss all of these other potential trajectories, right? So for me, even looking at your thematic when I was presented with it, and the first time that I had done a pass through looking at the approach to the design of new middles, it was to break down the language word by word in full so that I could visually understand and comprehend what you were writing.
I think Jeremiah said a word, I think it was respect. So it's a place that has an incredible history. So the idea of going with respect to that history, to understand it, but with a sense of curiosity, to learn more about why those buildings came to be, what happened in that place that it didn't happen in other places, and understand that aspect. So I think there is talking to people who they've been very generous, the local community, to actually explain why they think it's a unique place, what is outstanding, what are maybe aspects that could be stronger. And then this idea of having a series of conversations and let things come forward, I think that's always like a good way to then create something or bring forward certain conversations that then can complement what's happening there. And I think tying it to the previous question, to me, it's interesting that sometimes when you're a very successful city, you select what you portray of the city, but also that hides other aspects that might be very valuable. And to me, having grown up in Bilbao, we got the good thing or the bad thing. It's a good thing that we got the Guggenheim, but that really shined a very strong spotlight onto one building, and it really didn't allow for other things to see that were happening there. And I think this is the same thing. We have incredible buildings, an incredible story in Columbus, that it's a great business card. It's a great way to present the city, but there is more than that. There is like the daily life. There are other things there. So it's always interesting to see what else complements those narratives and how do we tell a much more comprehensive story about the place. So, but it's a fascinating place. And I'll bring back to you, Mimi, like how do you approach Columbus?
Yeah.
Well, I think I've had the opportunity to sort of be part of Exhibit Columbus for more than one cycle. And so it's over time, I've been able to explore it, whether that is sort of, running around the exhibitions at night with, sort of trying to, sort of find that joy in exploring a place, perhaps less formally. And then, so through conversations, really sort of through talking to the team, through the many conversations that we've had with community members. I think one of my favorites was with our symposium when we had the folks from Nomad, the art student, the high school students who are, created an art and music space for themselves, and really hearing from them, what kinds of spaces they needed or sort of were looking to explore. And I think that way that, yes, we, as we're all kind of design fanatics, design nerds, we come to a place, wanting to see all, the Miller House and, all the great architecture. But then what becomes sort of the heart of the place is how that place is used. And I think that is something that we've been exploring. And I know that our teams have also been exploring, and so that this kind of invisible space is starting to kind of percolate and be made more visible. And I think that's been reflected in how your identity has evolved over the course of the exhibition, or a course of the cycle leading into the exhibition, until the point that we're at now, where it really is about creating a kind of viewfinder for the city, right? That we are asking ourselves to reflect on a place. I think back to when you first, Ash, and this is probably about a year ago, when you first showed us the thematic sort of sketches, and the way that new middles typeface has that flicker, right? Like it has a flicker between seeing a figure, which is the circle, and then seeing the text. I think also speaks to the way that that we see as the city, right? Like that it's kind of going in between a fixed definition of what something is and this more open-ended question of what it might become.
Yeah, and Jeremiah, I think I want to maybe bring up one of the questions about, as Mimi said, you started like about a year ago, and then everything had shifted tremendously from how things have been approached in the past, and even making us reconsider how we would have these conversations and how do we carry something that is so important, but also maybe in different formats. And what you've shown also is like your work is so interdisciplinary. You do design, you do performances, you do other collaborative work, and also you go through print, through digital, like you do beer cans, you do many other things. So I'm curious if you can just kind of like also talk a little bit about that fluidity, and then how does that shift and being able to navigate allows you to tell maybe stories in a different way, or navigate situations like the one that we've been having in the last year and a half.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, it's something that it's a continuously evolving practice, and it's taken quite a long time to understand even how to share, present, or talk about work in this way. And in a lot of ways, there were these moments and experiences that I was having when in Chicago, and having more of like starting a design studio and being somebody that played music and was making art, that you could go to something like a design event, a concert at a local club, or an art opening, and there was only a handful of people that you might see at all three of those on a regular basis that were always kind of engaged in those things. And I thought, why aren't more people always operating in this way? And I think for me, it was really hard to let go of one or the other thing, maybe either due to my stubbornness or due to my passion, right? Or a combination of the two. But as I continued to work through those things, I'm always trying to find new ways to combine them or have those experiences connect to create new and meaningful expressions. And I think that like there was this, this moment where I was like, well, all of these things essentially deal with the same vocabulary when you're making them, right? If you talk about composition, you're really thinking you can use that in any of these contexts: balance, harmony, dynamics, all of these things like function both visually or orally. And when you're thinking about it in those terms, it actually brings things more closely together than further apart. And so there became a lot of opportunities where if I was working on a project or something, to say like, well, what might that expression, if I'm making a visual piece, what might it sound like, or vice versa? What might this sound look like? And that started to become this really nice study, right? That it continued to push forward and say like, this is the realm that I feel very comfortable in, and maybe I don't know how to label it or genre-fy it, but I think that it started to matter less and less, right? And as you see nowadays, like everyone sort of has these tools at hand, and there's much more of a practice that is multidisciplinary than not. And I think that that's it's nice to see that grow over time. So for me, it's just something that allows me to continually maintain a sort of like a drive and an interest. And I think, I don't know, maybe I like read the Miles Davis autobiography at just the right point in time in my life when it started to impact everything I did, and saying, the search for the new is the ultimate quest, right? That I always want these new experiences, that I always want to question things and see what possibilities exist. And if you keep on practicing in that way, your threshold becomes extremely high, right? So you are able to embrace something that makes you quite uncomfortable in moments, but then you kind of trust that the process will guide you to a result that you couldn't have thought of in the beginning.
And I want to touch upon another point about the way you've approached this, the design for this edition based on the curatorial approach. But you've shown in your presentation kind of like the great legacy of design in Columbus and how it's redefined its identity from Girard ran, but also like how Rick took that and then pushed it, and then now you're continuing that. But as Mimi presented at the beginning, we're looking through the lenses of Columbus, really kind of like using it as a laboratory of thinking, of design, but also connecting it to another place. So I'm curious about that transition coming from a strong legacy of identifying one place to now thinking about how do we convey this idea of network, of connection, of a place that with that identity, but expanding it and relating to other places.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like, you know, it will also become more and more clear for those that, you know, continue to follow the exhibition and see how the materials play out. But, you know, as Mimi mentioned, the idea of like the viewfinder becoming integral to the way that we're approaching this identity, that these, you know, these shapes that sit behind me are not solid forms, but in fact masks that you can see through, is something that naturally evolved through our conversations, right? As we begin to talk more and more about what the role of the identity is, the role of the graphic form in supporting the work of all of the participants, but also bringing some sort of life, new life or connection to the legacy that exists there. These are all the things that we conversed about at length, and saying like, well, at the end of the day, if we were to look at all of these pieces in sequence, you know, the work that I'm creating will live alongside. And so there has to be a way that it connects and doesn't all of a sudden feel like it's this, you know, completely arbitrary gesture, right, that comes out of nowhere, but instead that it connects very, very clearly to the legacy, but also we then know where we can push and pull, right? And say, here's the opportunity. What else can we do? Does the identity, if we know that a lot of people are going to engage with this primarily through a digital form, does it start to move? Does it have a dynamic, you know, construction? And also when you're in space, you know, that led to asking that question and saying like, well, if it moves in the digital landscape, because time is a factor on web browsers or on a screen, how might that translate to the physical or the analog? And so this idea of interacting now with the identity, with the forms and the shapes through something that could be a viewfinder that leads you through a space that is a wayfinding device, but also a drawing stencil or a way to look at something. I think those were all the potentials of saying we can now expand this identity in a contemporary way, in a way that actually facilitates our experience there.
Yeah, I think the way that you were saying earlier, like how does a design become a sound, or how does a sound become a design? I think that's also true. Like the question we're posed to you is, how does a city become a design, right? How does an exhibition become a design? And I think those translations between them are really important, right? It's not that there's an identity system that is necessarily branding something, right? Although, you know, we do have a full identity, but it's a way for these different elements to start to come through. I also am just curious about you haven't come to Columbus yet because of, you know, everything, but finally you're going to be there next week, and I'm sort of dying to know, what are you looking forward to seeing based on all of these, everything you've heard already and you've been following along with the design presentations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, I have the luxury of being able to have a nice guided tour from the Exhibit Columbus team. And so it's so interesting always. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to actually visit the place in person and, you know that feels safe and okay to do right now, given all the circumstances, because, you know, it very well could have not happened. And I think that, like, when you spend so much time reading, looking at the images, walking around on the Google Street View and the maps, like, you know, I've developed a different understanding of what that place might be like. And so that, you know, see the scale, to understand the distance, but also I think in looking at like the design presentations, all of those other touch points for me are activated in a really interesting way. So, I'm looking forward to saying like, can I listen for a bat sound? Can I see, the symbols and shapes and the forms? How is the river going to impact me as I'm walking towards it? All of these kinds of things start to come to life in a new way. And I think it's, we're at a point now in which we have a good understanding of how some of the pieces that we're working through are going to live in space, but actually to do sort of a walkthrough and experience that is going to certainly change everything, right? It's going to make things real, but it also gives new opportunities to say like, now I can actually come in here with a different set of senses and experience the place in a new way.
It reminds me of the Paul Klee line that drawing is taking a line for a walk, right? So you'll finally get to sort of take a walk through our mappings of Columbus. There's been a question in the chat as wondering about the music that you've produced for us, but also some of the music that you are going to produce for us for opening weekend.
I think there are some conversations happening right now. I think some people are in this call as well. So there are things that I think, in looking at the different sonic projects that have a sonic quality to them, that's the first place to start to engage and see like what opportunities exist to do some sort of activation or participation or collaboration there. So the answer to producing music for the exhibition is probably something I hope will happen in a really rich and wonderful way, and looking forward to how that might evolve over the next month and a half.
What I love about the kind of like tying to this idea of music and the relationship to some of the participants, what I think is great is like how the way you've been part of the project is not only just to create an identity to the project, but it's really like being part of the conversation about from the different projects, certain aspects that there is a clear relationship between your work and the work of the participants. So the way you work, there is like this blurry and fluidity between your work. There is also with the participants and the installation. So all of a sudden the identity takes a certain connotation once it's placed with the projects, but the installations are informing the way you're thinking about it. So there is something very interesting that has been developing from the beginning. But as we know, also like the design through the design presentations, the work that everybody's doing, like how that comes together in a way that you might think, well, was that done through the guys who were doing the installation, or is that the design that is pushing the other way? So there is something, there's some beautiful conversations I think happening across all the participants.
I see a question that Janice has popped into the chat here. And she wants you to speak about how you're looking for edges or contrasts. Oops, perhaps my dog wants to ask a question. Thinking about simultaneous readings within your work and sort of within the work you're doing for Columbus.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the contrast is at the core, right? I think so often when we're looking and developing the work both in conversation and in practice is to look for like, what are the similarities and differences? And so, as I was just speaking to the identity and how it's evolved or transitioned over the course of the last year, those are the opportunities that I'm interested in, which is as I do the walkthrough in the space and we make adjustments, in the current state, you kind of have this plan in mind where you're like, here's how wayfinding functions, here's where like directionals exist, and this is how you might allow somebody to navigate through space. But then so much of what we've been looking at and talking about is how else can you engage with that space and actually create a framework that supports some wandering, right? So some opportunities for people to look for the edges, right? To actually push the identity further and activate it in a way that I couldn't have, designed. So I think there's a lot of those moments in the material that we're working through right now, which is to say, like, how do we create something that, of course, does the work of promoting and advertising the information and the details, but then where does the poetry lie? How can the framework that you've created with this design start to actually change and mold through use? And I think that becomes a really interesting moment to say, like, here are a couple of things, and I have every intention of allowing for somebody to interact with this one way, but of course, everyone is going to come to it in a different way, and certainly do something that I don't anticipate or expect. I think that's exactly where you want it to go. And that's the exciting moment. It's like, what else is going to shift and what else could happen? So kind of preparing or creating a little bit of that platform or framework, I think, is really integral to the way that we've been thinking about the identity.
Yeah, I think that's something we're so excited about, the way that these works, which frankly, we've all been living with digitally throughout this last year, and to have them manifest, physically is I think something that is going to be so thrilling when we get to Columbus and when we have everybody join us. I want to maybe switch a little bit, and I think one of the slides that you talked about was about sort of the we've got too many masters at this point in time, and it sort of resonates with me, both in terms of sort of looking structurally at how design and modernism have sort of put forward the idea of the master and the master artist, but also thinking about collaboration. And as you mentioned, this is our second project. I think probably your probably 10th or 12th project working with Iker. But I maybe want to talk a little bit more about collaboration, and maybe ask you to think about, like, what are the ways that you like to collaborate, or how moments from our collaborations that maybe stand out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'm also curious to know, but I think that, like, in learning the practice of graphic design from more Eurocentric pedagogy and approach, like, there's sort of like here are the steps, right? This is how you practice. You can work in these ways, you work in these places and spaces. And for me, it's always saying, like, well, what else, what other ways can I work, and what other ways can we do things? But also, is this representative of really the kind of society that I'm trying to participate in, and how do I bring more voices into the mix? And so I think that, like, for me, the role of collaboration, I do think a lot about in a similar way to the way that you might do this in music, which is, like, if you are improvising with someone, you don't tell them how to improvise or what to play, right? Instead, you say, like, I trust you, and we're now having a conversation and dialogue, and I'm going to respond to what you say or would do, and how you move, and the emotions and the quality that you bring, so that we might form sort of like a collaborative expression. And I think that's much more interesting to me than exerting a level of control that may certainly result in, like, a certain level of precision and detail, but at a certain point then loses a little bit of life, right? A humanity to it. So collaboration for me is something that I'm always conscious of, but also I'm intentional about, and say, like, if I am asking somebody to collaborate on something, I'm doing it because I want to engage in the dialogue, and I want to engage in what someone else brings to the table, what their voice is, how they approach, what their perspective is, that may be different from mine, certainly different from mine, right? And so I think that becomes really quite beautiful and interesting. And I think that you can sense that like in our collaborations and the way that we practice, I'm pretty flexible at the end of the day when we're working through this stuff, because I want to see things move as well. And I want to see like what else can happen, and what ideas or how are other people reading things, both from a visual perspective to a language perspective to a sonic perspective. So I love the idea of collaborating, where we can let go of a little bit of that control, but then we find trust in each other.
Yeah, I think we've worked for many projects together. We work with Mimi on the US Pavilion, and it's interesting to me to see the evolution of your work, and also what is the ethos and what are the things that they are at the core of your practice, but how it evolves and how each project has its own identity. And there is some exploration, there is something that comes new that also becomes very like a strong representation of the idea that was being explored there from everybody involved. So to me, like seeing how you're translating your explorations into Exhibit Columbus, and then how there is that sense of new aspects that you're bringing that neither Mimi and I, like we don't know, and we're waiting for you to see what you're doing when you're saying with the sound and all those things. It's exciting, and it's always a pleasure to kind of like see you take us in a wild ride. So.
I know it's been so far, it's been so amazing to sort of be surprised, and sort of pieces will come over the transom and we'll just be like, we just love it. Like this is just something is resonating in really sort of important ways. With that, I want to bring in yet another collaborator, Anne Serac, to help us sort of sum up today's conversation and tell us about what's next.
Well, you were talking about collaborating, and I wanted to pop in because it's been a real joy to collaborate with all of you over the past 18 months. And we couldn't have imagined better creative minds to bring in to, Exhibit Columbus, but also to the community. And so I would just say, here's to celebrating that collaboration and to finding poetry and surprise and what's to come with the exhibition. So thanks to all of you for the work that you've been doing to make that happen here.
Oh, thank you, Anne and Jeremiah and Iker for this conversation.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks everyone. Thank you, Jeremiah, Mimi, and Iker for being in today's event. Wonderful conversation, beautiful presentation, Jeremiah. Thank you very much. To our Landmark Columbus Board of Directors and our Design Legacy supporters, again, we have so much gratitude for having you be an integral part of making our program a reality. A huge thank you to our Exhibit Columbus team. Mimi Zeiger, Iker Gill, Janice Shimizu, Ben Ballantyne, Hadley Fruits, Jamie Goldsboro, Bethany Farrell, Liz Kubani, and Richard McCoy. The graphics, animation, and music for our program today were all created by our New Middles graphic designer, Jeremiah Chiu of Some All None. Thank you all for joining us. Please stay connected to our work. Follow us on social media. Sign up for our newsletter. We have a lot of exciting events happening this fall. And we look forward to seeing all of you in Columbus on August 21st for the opening weekend of Exhibit Columbus 2021. Have a great week, everyone.